and thank you for joining us for this virtual program in commemoration of the St. Louis Lessons from the Holocaust. You can watch our previous programs on HIAS Pennsylvania's YouTube page and also on our website, which is in the chat, www.hiaspa.org. My name is Cathryn Miller-Wilson, and I'm the Executive Director of HIAS Pennsylvania, a nonprofit whose mission is to provide immigration legal services to low-income immigrants and refugees in Pennsylvania. For those of you unfamiliar with the story about the St. Louis, in May 1939, the German liner St. Louis sailed from Hamburg, Germany to Havana, Cuba. The 937 passengers were almost all Jewish refugees. Although the passengers had visas giving them permission to land in Cuba, upon arrival, Cuba's government refused to honor the visas and would not allow the ship to land. In a desperate attempt to find safety for the passengers, the captain sailed the ship to Florida and begged President Roosevelt to permit the passengers to enter the country. He and Congress refused. On June 6, 1939, having no other choice, the ship turned around to sail back to Europe. The St. Louis passengers were permitted to land in Western European countries rather than return to Nazi Germany, but ultimately, 254 of them were caught by the Nazis anyway and killed in the Holocaust. Much like today, Americans were suffering economically when the ship tried to land. The Great Depression had left millions of people in the United States unemployed and fearful of competition for the scarce few jobs available. It also fueled anti-Semitism, xenophobia, nativism, and isolationism. A Fortune magazine poll at the time indicated that 83% of Americans opposed relaxing restrictions on immigration. President Roosevelt could have issued an executive order to admit the St. Louis refugees. However, public hostility towards immigrants and other political considerations made him reluctant to take this step. Isolationist Republicans, for example, had gained seats in the congressional elections of 1938. The irony about these supposed reasons provided for refusing to let the ship land is a significant part of why the Great Depression occurred. Quotas established in the Immigration Act of 1924, the Johnson-Reed Act, strictly limited the number of immigrants who could be admitted to the United States each year. While at the time, no one connected the Great Depression to this massively exclusionary immigration law, subsequent studies show that the drop in immigration caused by the implementation of that act led to massive drops in patent applications, business creation, jobs creation, and tax dollars. All of this created a weak economic foundation, which ultimately crumbled once the stock market crashed. My guest today is the director of a German organization called Action Reconciliation Service for Peace, ARSP in English or ASF in German. Her organization, created after World War II to atone for the suffering of people and countries as a result of Nazi war crimes, strives to reach diverse target groups with their historical and political educational work. For example, they work with an intersectional approach together with migrant self-organizations, mostly with Muslim women, on Holocaust education, and they make an effort to reach target groups that have less access to Holocaust education. The director is Jutta, Weduwen, and she will start us off by telling us how her organization has accomplished this, and then talk to us about the lessons she and the ARSP volunteers take from their volunteer work. Our discussion will lead to reflections about the lessons we can learn not only from the Holocaust, but specifically from the actions, not only of Germany, who was persecuting and murdering millions of people, but from others who stood by and did nothing to save those fleeing from that persecution when they had the power to do so. If you have any questions during the discussion, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. To open the Q&A, click on the More option at the bottom of your screen, and it should open a menu with Q&A as one of the options. We receive a lot of questions during our webinars, so we'll get to as many as we can during the program. Okay, welcome, Jutta. And I apologize if I mispronounced your last name. Do you want to start off by just telling us? Oh, you're muted.
sorry, it's called Weduwen, but even in Germany, it's a Dutch word or Dutch name, and even in Germany, hardly anybody can pronounce it. So it's called Weduwen. So, but never mind.
Weduwen. Okay, thank you. So let's start with ARSP. Tell us what your organization does and how you think that accomplishes your mission.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me here. We had the chance to meet personally because I had the chance to visit the United States and to visit some of the placements of the volunteers, and one of that was HIAS in Pennsylvania. And I was deeply, deeply impressed by your work and the opportunity you give to our volunteers. So what I understood is that you also get a lot from the volunteers, but I can see what a benefit our volunteers take from being placed in such wonderful projects. So it's an honor for me to be here, and I'm happy to talk to you. As you mentioned a lot of our organization in your introduction, thank you very much for that. So Action Reconciliation Service for Peace. The German word is Aktion Sühnezeichen Friedensdienste. I will get back to that name in a minute. It was founded by the Protestant Church in Germany to acknowledge the church's complicity in Nazi crimes. And this is a very important and interesting approach because those people who founded the organization were within the resistance movement in the church resistance movement during Nazi Germany, most of them, but they didn't say we were the resistance and that's why this is what we stick to, but we want to take responsibility for the guilt and for the crimes the Nazis did. So the idea behind is to acknowledge the church's complicity in the Nazi crimes. And the German word Aktion Sühnezeichen Friedensdienste would be correctly translated into sign of atonement, peace services. This would be the translation. And there was, even when the organization was founded in Germany, there was a discussion to call it sign of reconciliation. But a lot of people said, don't use this word because the Nazi crimes are that atrocious. They are so cruel, and you cannot, and the meaning for the victims is so immense that you cannot expect reconciliation between perpetrators and their descendants and victims and their descendants. And that's why it's called, this would be inappropriate. And that's why it's called sign of atonement, peace service. Even though, I think it's difficult to understand. I mean, sign of atonement is not a used expression, and also Sühnezeichen is not. It's not very common. It relates to theology and to law, but we try to find these discussions also with our volunteers to understand why the name is Sühnezeichen and not reconciliation. And I must say, and this is something what I'm deeply thankful for, that of course in many cases reconciliation takes place. There are so many friendships between young volunteers and older Holocaust survivors, and that is some kind of reconciliation, of course. But we do not want to expect it in our organization's name. So our mission is not just about engaging with history. It is about making memory active and history active and relevant for today. And as you mentioned before, the main focus we have, or the main field we are working is our volunteer services. Each year we send young people, mostly from Germany, but also from other countries, to work in memorial sites. They work with Holocaust survivors, as I mentioned before. They work in educational institutions. They work in the social field with people with disabilities. They work with organizations fighting anti-Semitism and racism. And right now, volunteers go to 9 countries, or to 10 countries. They go to 9 countries in Europe and beside that to Israel and in the United States. Later on, I can also tell which countries. So the connection to the countries is that young people go to countries that were occupied or attacked by Nazi Germany, or to countries like the United States and Israel, where there is bigger Jewish communities, so where target groups are that were persecutors or who have descendants there. The idea behind this, may I continue? Or yeah?
Yes, go ahead.
What is important for us to say is that our idea behind the volunteer services is that the volunteers don't go just to help in a paternalistic way. I mean, and I hope in many cases they are of help and support, but the idea also is that they go to learn, that they go to listen, and that they go to build relationship. This is also what I mentioned before. And this relationship or this learning is through listening to survivor stories, working at a memorial site, supporting educational programs, and this means that they develop their own connection to history and to reflect with this historical background about their own being in the world, about their own whatever privileges, about the present and also the society they are living in. And beside our volunteer services, we have another main field we are working in, and these are our international summer camps. This is a short-term form of involvement, and this does not only relate to young people, also our volunteer services are open for all ages. You only have to be 18, but there is no age limit. Sometimes we have seniors doing a 1-year volunteer service, but mostly it's young people. But in the international summer camps, we also have different generations, different ages. And in the summer camps, they take between 10 and 12 days or 14 days. They combine historical learning with hands-on work. This is what summer camps do. So to give one example, groups travel to Poland, to Czech Republic, to the Baltic states, and they help, for instance, to restore neglected Jewish cemeteries. I mean, there are hardly Jewish people living there, but there are a lot of cemeteries. And the participants help to restore these cemeteries. And they learn something about the history, and they learn to come together. And especially the group of seniors who participate in these programs. I mean, in many cases in Germany, I don't know how the case is in the United States. In Germany, people have to retire. There are not so many chances to continue work. So most people retire when they are 65 or 67. And sometimes they're pretty much involved in family questions. But there are a lot of people who say, I never had the opportunity to have international experiences, and I want to continue learning, and I want to continue to get involved. And they come and they participate in these summer camps, and they get to know other people who have the same idea, and that's really great. So that's a great idea. Yeah.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful, the contemplating both the thoughtfulness that went in when you described about the name and also the size and scope. And I wasn't aware that there were senior volunteers, so that's really terrific as well. So my next question, what are some of the more interesting reflections you've heard from the volunteers you've selected and placed in nonprofits over the years? I'm sure you have hundreds of stories, but are there a few that stand out to you?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I want to say I really like that you use the term reflection, because this is something what I really want our volunteers. So this is the idea behind our pedagogical programs, is that there is room for reflections, and that it's not only that in our seminars, the goal is not to accumulate knowledge. I mean, we also give knowledge about whatever, historical facts or political facts or international facts, whatever, but It is more that they understand connections and that they critically reflect on their own behavior and on our society today. This is what I mentioned before. And if I look on the volunteers and the stories they tell me, I want them to sit with dilemmas, and I want them to tolerate complexity or ambiguity. I don't know if this is the right word.
Ambiguity, yeah.
Yeah, that they have a tolerance towards that. And I told you before, I'm happy when, especially in countries that have a complex history and present and politics and whatever, it is good when in the end of the year they would say, in the end, I have more questions than I had before. I have more questions than answers. And that is good. And I think this is a good foundation for standing up against hate and prejudice and against populism, you know, to see that there is a complexity in everything and that we have to keep with that. And when you ask about the reflections of the volunteers, there are some stories of the volunteers that really moved me deeply, and they made us also reflect our programs. And this is really important and good, and I would like to share some of them. I remember a conversation that I had with the volunteer. It's some 20 years ago. It's some time ago, but I know the follow-up. That's why it's interesting to mention that here. So there was a male volunteer who did a volunteer service in Prague in a care home, working with Jewish elderly people, many of them Holocaust survivors back then, 20 years ago. And one of the Holocaust survivors asked him what his grandfather did during the World War II. And this was a question, I had the same experience in Israel that nobody has asked me before. Nobody in Germany would have asked me, what did your grandparents do? Because we didn't talk about what they did. We took for granted whatever, yeah, but there was no conversation about it. And so he was asked by this older man, and the volunteer would answer the family story that his grandfather was a soldier during World War II. He was placed in France, but he saved Jewish lives in France. Yeah. And this was the family story. And the grandfather died, and only after the grandmother died, she always stick to that family story, they did research and they found out the complete opposite. Yeah, they found out that he did not save anyone at all, but on the contrast, that he was actively participating in torture and persecution. And on the one hand, it was really hard and painful for this grandson to find this out. But I kept talking to the family, also to his mother, and I had the feeling, even though it was painful, it was good for them to know the truth, because then they could understand how the family silenced, and how the family, that there was a lie, that there was a kind of tragedy, and that there was a lie, and that the family or the grandfather made himself a victim without being it. And this is really awful, you know, but I don't think it's so uncommon within German families. And this made us reflect that it's important also for the third generation or the fourth generation to know more about their family backgrounds. Nowadays, this is different to the guy I was speaking with. He knew his grandfather, and his grandfather was actively involved. But the volunteers who do the service now, they hardly know anybody who was involved. Yeah, because the grandparents are too young. Maybe they were bystanders, maybe they were kids, maybe they were youngsters, but they were all raised in a family with parents who didn't speak, who had to deal with guilt, feelings of guilt, whatever, or who resisted the way the German state dealt with the history, whatever. So it is really important for the families to know, and also for our volunteers. So we ask our volunteers to do, before they do their service, to do a small piece of family research to learn more about their own family history. And I would also say that it is good to do this to understand the own family, but also if somebody else comes and asks questions, I would say that this Jewish Holocaust survivors who asked the questions would have deserved the truth and not a lie, even though this young volunteer didn't know it was a lie, but he would have deserved, even though it would have been very, very painful to tell that, but maybe we don't know what would have come out of it. Yeah. So this is one story that moved us and that made us changing our program, asking volunteers to do these small pieces of research.
Sorry, I just want to comment. It's such a critical lesson for us as Americans as the current administration forces us to confront, I mean, the opposite of what they intend, right? But all the insistence on getting rid of information and education about slavery, in fact, has the opposite effect, but right? I mean, then people are confronting questions of slavery and saying, why are we changing this? Why are we ignoring this? You know? And I think the story you tell talks about how important it is to know and absorb the truth and to take responsibility. And I also venture to guess that the student you were talking about, had they corresponded with the person that had asked them the question originally and said, you know, I am very ashamed to admit this, but this is what I found out, I think they would have received forgiveness, you know, and it would have meant a lot to that student. And it would have strengthened the bridge, you know.
It can be, it can be that it's, and what is also important for us to say, I mean, it can be painful also for this person, but also for other persons whom we ask to do this kind of research. But we do not force them to share it. They can. It's an issue within our seminars, in the countries, but we do not force them to share it if they don't want to share it. And we also have an open definition of families. It's not that it has to be the core family. Some didn't grow up in a core family with mother, father, siblings, whatever. It can, and if they do not want to go into it, maybe they don't want to do it now, maybe they want to do it in 10 years or whatever, they can also do a research on their village or the community or whatever. So we are, of course, have an open definition of what to do. But I will, maybe I give another example, what made us to implement biographical elements in our seminars. You were mentioning that we do seminars with immigrants. This is a very interesting program. It's an intersectional approach, and we started to do that specifically like 25 years or even 30 years ago. A group of Muslim women from a neighborhood in Berlin approached us and asked us to do seminars on the Holocaust, to teach them the Holocaust. And they did this, and everybody expects, oh my God, they do it. Everybody thinks Muslims are not interested in that. This is what the common opinion is. And they approached us because they said they were not raised in Germany. Mostly they only immigrated. They were either first generation or they went to schools with lower education, so they didn't have wide range history classes, so they didn't know enough. And now they have kids, and the kids visit memorial sites and they come back. There are some memorial sites outside Berlin, Sachsenhausen and Ravensbrück, and they come home and they want to talk with their parents about it. And they say, we have little knowledge about it and we want to learn more about it. And beside that, we see that a lot of political discussions are related to Second World War, like to say, Should there be military attacks on? Should there be military support for the Ukraine? Should there be should the German army get involved in protecting Croatia, Bosnia, whatever? It's always related to Second World War, or even the question about abortion, whatever. There are a lot of ethical questions that are always related to our past. And if you do not know this past or the discourse about it, then it's hard for you to participate in discussions. So it was not that we said, these women, these immigrant Muslim women, need more education. They need to learn more about anti-Semitism than people who have lived in Germany since 5 generations. We do not say that. Yeah, we do not judge people to have less or more or whatever, or that they would need more. But it is that we saw they wanted more education because they want to participate. And this is why we created these programs. It's wonderful. And when we speak with immigrants about the Nazi crimes, it in many cases evokes own experiences of violence. Because a lot of people who immigrate to Germany, they either come from countries where there is a civil war, or they experienced wars, or their families experienced wars, or they experience violence on their flight, or they experience either verbal or physical racism in Germany. So the idea of the experience of violence is really vivid with a lot of immigrants. And when we speak about the Holocaust and the persecution and the war, of course, this is evoked, and they want to speak about that. And I remember one woman, Senayet from Eritrea. She participated in one of the seminars. Before I became the CEO, I did the seminars. I really, it was wonderful to give these seminars because I learned so much from the women. And in one of the sessions, she said, I want us to tell our stories. And it was not at all that she, and I think she even said it, it's not that I want to say I have the same hard story as a Jewish mother had, whatever, even though she suffered the civil war in Eritrea. She lost all her family. She came as a teenager. To come from Africa to Germany, it's such a long way. You know what happens there, yeah, on all the ways in North Africa. She must have experienced a lot of violence. And even though that she said, I do not want to minimize the Holocaust victims' suffering, but I would like to tell our story. And all the other women said, yeah, this is a wonderful idea because we never have the chance to tell our story. And then we published a book. And what we did is that they told their stories, and they related to the learning of the Holocaust and what it means to them. So it's not that they report, we have been to the Wannsee conference and this happened in 1942. It was not. It was rather that they said, the visit in the House of Wannsee conference evoked this and that. And I can relate to this history with my own experience. And this is what it, how it related with me. And this is what we published. And so what we found out is that people are more open for others' sufferings when they have the chance to tell their own sufferings, especially when it's hardly heard. So it was an acknowledgement of their sufferings and their stories without minimizing the stories we know from the Holocaust. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Is that book translated into English?
It's not, but we have Google Translate. We have now deeper. We can think about it. Maybe I can send you the link, and yeah. And
try to get it. Yeah.
I could share more stories, but maybe I don't know if you want to go to the next question. Yeah.
There's a quick question in the chat that I want to get to, which is just somebody asked, has continued its relationship with the Protestant Church?
Yeah. So when we were founded, we were part of the Protestant Church, but we are still close to the churches, but not only the Protestant Church, but also the Catholic Church. So we get funded by both, mostly by the Protestant Church, but we consider ourselves as interreligious, interconfessional, and also open for all religions, and also open for people who are not religious at all. This is important for us to say. So the founding was, and we get funded by the Protestant Church. And what the Protestant Church means when they fund us is we want to support an organization that stands for international reconciliation, for international meetings, exchange, for international exchange. We want to support an organization that takes responsibility for the past, but also for the present, and also to fight right-wing extremism, to fight anti-Semitism, and to support young people, no matter if they are religious or not, and no matter what religion they have.
Great. So that maybe answers my next question, but are all of the nonprofit placements Jewish or working with Jews?
Most of, would you call your organization a Jewish organization? By the way, it is? It's
So
the base. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We call ourselves historically Jewish.
Yeah.
Because there is a definition that the American government has about religious organization, and we don't meet that definition, and we intentionally do not, because we serve everybody, but
Yeah.
we have this history that we're proud of. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So this is a placement, so say historically in a Jewish organization, and we have a lot of them. Volunteers work with Holocaust survivors in memorial sites. Not all memorial sites are Jewish places, but some or most of them are related, especially to the Shoah, to the Holocaust. But the placements in Germany, the memorial sites in Germany, they are state-run, they are not Jewish. And we also work, for instance, in Jewish kindergartens, but we do not only work in Jewish organizations. Some of our volunteers, as I mentioned before, work with refugees and asylum seekers. For instance, in Greece, in refugee camps for instance, in Thessaloniki, they work with female refugees. They support them with sewing, and so it's a wonderful project. Our volunteers work in educational programs, also against racism, right-wing extremism, anti-Semitism. They work with people with disabilities. They work with the community of Sinti and Roma, who have also been targeted for genocide. Yeah, so this is also a very important field that we're working in. And in some countries, people work with homeless people. It's rather that not all target groups the volunteers are working with are exactly related to groups that were persecuted by the Nazis, but rather that we say that we work with countries that were occupied or that suffered or so, and we look what people need there. And this is rather the approach. Yeah.
Great.
And I can say that this year we have placed 120 volunteers, and I can just mention the countries the volunteers are working in. It's Greece, Poland, Israel, Belgium, the Netherlands, Great Britain, Norway, France, the Czech Republic, Germany, and the United States. These are the countries they are placed in. And what is missing in these collection of countries is Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. Until 22, we have placed volunteers there. And it's such a pain. It's such a pain that there is this war of Russia, this aggressive war of Russia against Ukraine. But you can really see what it means that this exchange has been lacking since 4 years, because it's not only that the young people stay there for a year, but they bring so much back, and they bring a knowledge of a civil society and individuals back. And many of them studied Eastern European studies. They study Russian. They become journalists. They become scientists. And what is that their foundation is a personal experience, and this is so important. And they relate to it, and this is missing since 4 years, and this is incredible.
Wow. There's a question in the chat. What year did your organization start?
In 58, almost 90,
1950.
and almost 70 years ago. Yeah,
Wow.
1958.
Wow, that's great. And then I don't know if you know this this answer offhand, but how many people have been part of the programs in the 70 years? Do you have a rough total or?
Yeah. So I would say like 15,000 young volunteers who the men could do this instead of their army service. This was really them. There were much more men than nowadays. Yeah, so men could do it in a compulsory service or whatever you call it. And so it was some 15,000 volunteers and some 15,000, 20,000 participants of summer camps.
Wow, that's great. All right, so back to my questions. When you reflect specifically about the St. Louis, the story that I told about the ship and how immigration laws played a major role in what ultimately resulted in the murder of over 200 people, what are some of your takeaways from that incident?
Mm-hmm. I don't know how the situation is in the United States, because the most refugees do not come with boats, but in Europe they do. So learning the story of St. Louis immediately brings to my mind the situation of the refugees today who die in the Mediterranean. Yeah, because there is hardly a chance to come. Like, people try to come from Northern Africa, or they try to come from Arabic countries through Turkey, and they try to get from Africa, they try to get into Italy, and from Turkey, they try to get into Greece. And there are so many refugees who have to take unsafe boats, and they are pushed back. They are either they really collapse. Some manage to come. I mean, there are a lot of people who really manage to come to Lesbos, an island that is really close to Turkey, but a lot die in the Mediterranean, or they are even pushed back. I mean, you have this Frontex. This is the frontier police is called Frontex, and they have the right to do pushbacks. Or I even don't know, they do it. I think it's really controversial, but there are pushback actions, and a lot of people die in the Mediterranean. This is really awful. The takeaway from the story of the St. Louis is, for me, that every person has a reason to flee. There is no individual that takes all the risks on himself if there is not a reason of violence, of persecution, of climate changes, and like strong poverty. And but they are treated like a threat. I mean, this is also what happened to them in Cuba and what happened to them in Florida. Yeah, that there are laws, and they consider them as a threat. And there is a language of people who resist refugees and do not want to give asylum to them. They call them a flood of refugees. It's an invasion of refugees. And a takeaway is that every individual case deserves to be taken seriously and deserves to be proved. And this is actually what Germany said after the Holocaust. Yeah, after they considered and they recognized the guilt they had, and that they recognized that there was so much complicity, because so many countries denied refugees the immigration, and they were also pushed back, as the St. Louis experience has. So in Germany after World War II, there was a right that everybody could apply for asylum, and there was a right. not everybody received it. Also, people were sent out, but everybody had the right to apply for asylum. And now Germany, since many years, like more than 20 years, sticks to EU rules, and the EU rules and laws say that a refugee can only ask for asylum in the country where he first reaches out to. So since Germany does not have any borders to a non-EU country, it's only surrounded by EU countries, hardly people get in to. Only when Angela Merkel, our chancellor, said we opened the borders in 2015 and 500,000 refugees came. But beside that, refugees can hardly get here on a legal way. If they get here also on an illegal way, sometimes they are pushed back to the countries where they came from. Sometimes they can apply for asylum. But what you can see is Germany, even though we have our history that should make us say everybody has the right to apply for asylum, sticks to rules and laws and sticks to bureaucracy. And this is also a takeaway, is that legal structures and bureaucracy can put lives at a risk, or in many cases put lives at a risk, and that it's really, really important to question bureaucracy and legal structures as long as it is possible. And I know that there are situations that people who would resist laws, and I mean, we have to have rules. I mean, our societies have to have laws and rules. I'm not questioning that, but there are cases where you have each individual has the possibility to act differently and not only to stick to rules. And I can say, I mean, now it is that a lot of boats on the Mediterranean, even though if they struggle, they are not rescued because there are hardly guards on the Mediterranean, and a lot of boats could have been saved, or people on the boats could have been saved. But there are rescue ships now, like that are bought and run by civil societies and also by the Protestant Church. I'm really proud of that. They bought, like 10 years ago or so, there was a movement from the bottom, and they said nobody should die. This is point. This is our approach. Nobody should die. Nobody should die in the Mediterranean, and we want the Protestant Church, the umbrella organization, we want them to buy a boat and go on the Mediterranean and rescue refugees. And this is what happened. So there are always possibilities to question rules and to do something beside the soldiers and the border policemen.
Yeah, I think it's such an important parallel that you draw, and it makes me think about the need for a strong individual sense of ethics, and specifically because I don't know if you followed, because there's so much news coming out of the United States given everything that's going on. But one of the streams of news was about questioning military orders. And there were former high up military officials who came out to say strongly that, look, if your commander gives you what you perceive to be an illegal order, it is your duty to stand up and not do that. Right, which is kind of directly contrary to the training of the military structure. You follow orders, but it very much comes out of I think the Holocaust. Right, many Nazi soldiers at Nuremberg said, "I was just following orders." And they said that when they were sending people to the gas chamber, they said that when they were torturing people, and it's sort
Yeah.
of like, at what point does it become obvious to you that this is not an order to be followed, right?
Yeah.
And it's very difficult. I mean, I think it's easy for us to sit back and put on the goggles of history and say, look, if somebody is telling you to murder, 10,000 people, then you should probably challenge it. But it's never really that simple, right? It's never, it's smaller orders within a bureaucratic structure where you're meant to follow orders. And you're in the American military, you're taught that following orders is about keeping each other safe. That if you don't follow, if you hesitate, if you do something wrong, you could put all your fellow soldiers in danger. So it's a very, very difficult line. But I think it's, why the Holocaust teachings are so important, right? To kind of remind us that in the end, we have to do the individual work ourselves of strengthening our sense of right and wrong so that in those moments, we can identify there's
Yeah.
something wrong with
Yeah.
this, right?
Yeah.
And with the boats, it's like, okay, there's immigration laws, there's borders, we understand that, but here's a boat full of people who are drowning. And we're just supposed to say, well, that's immigration,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. I mean,
and
the thing is, if there is a boat drowning, the
mhm,
all states give out the order that people have to be rescued. You
right,
do not see them dying,
right,
but there are much too little boats that could rescue people, and this is what the civil society and the church does. There have to be much more boats, but yeah, and also they would help maybe to, yeah, and then there are these rules: how far are you away from which border, and which country have to take you, and so on. Yeah, I what you said before, it's in many cases people would say, and I totally accept that, if a person is in danger of being tortured or being whatever, yeah, it is really difficult to resist orders, yeah, but there are so many stages before people are in danger.
right,
It's
right,
also when we speak about nowadays, and when we speak about observing or um, being part of it. You are on a subway and you see that somebody is attacked racially. Yeah, if you see racism taking place, and then we have workshops and we work on how can you react and how can you confront the person who's racist. Most people would say yes, but I'm afraid, and then
right,
they have the fantasy of a situation where neo-Nazi skinheads would enter a subway. They have these military shoes and they immediately start to be violent. But this is not what most of us experience. But in many cases, it's you have a family thing, and then an uncle says something racist. So there are many opportunities where you can resist and you can say something and you can intervene without being in danger. And this is something what we have to look at.
right,
Yeah.
right. Well, we weren't able to get to all of the questions, and we're close to time. So I want to thank you, Jutta. As we close out this program that commemorates the Holocaust for the purpose of teaching us about how we can learn from episodes of governmental persecution and genocide, I want to share with you a government website that went live at the beginning of this week. It's so shocking that you will swear it is fake, but it's not. So, this is a government website. They walk among us. For 60 years, the US government has kept a closely guarded secret. Aliens have been walking among us, living in our neighborhoods, interacting with us in our daily lives. We've shopped in the same stores, attended the same classes, and lived seemingly normal human existence. With one exception, they don't belong here. They've arrived under cover of darkness, embedded themselves directly into our society. And here they have these encounters, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. Here's an alien arrest map and it shows criminal charges. This is completely made up. It's false. Countries of origin. It shows Philadelphia specifically because that's where I'm joining from. And again, made up criminal charges on a government website. Then it has a tip line telling neighbors to call ICE. If you've witnessed an alien abduction, do not be alarmed. The alien is in good hands. We will take care of it and return it safely to its place of origin. They weren't little green men. These aliens are the millions of illegals who invaded our country under the cover of darkness. And then you can stay informed about alien encounters by adding your email address. This is so appalling. It's difficult to talk about. And I'm going to stop sharing. And hold on, I messed myself up a little bit. If you'll just bear with me. Okay. Now, just this morning, New York Times opinion columnist M. Geffen said it best, and I'm quoting now. What struck me after spending too much time staring at the page was that it wants you to be afraid of all aliens, the space kind and the quote unquote illegal kind, but also the quote legal kind, foreign-born people who've been living in this country for decades. As for the counter, it's tracking nothing. The numbers just tick upward at a perfectly steady pace, one every second and a bit. The sentences about aliens walking among us, living in our neighborhoods, Ernesto Verdeja, a genocide prevention expert at the University of Notre Dame, said, read to him like invocations of the great replacement theory, which has become so familiar as to seem almost mainstream. It's similar to the way Jews were talked about in Europe in the 1920s and 30s, Verdeja said. Benjamin Valentino, a professor of government at Dartmouth College, thinks that the purpose of the page is not to get Americans to do anything. It's to get them to do nothing, while the government commits its campaign of cruelty against millions of people just trying to live in peace. They want a majority of the population to turn their backs, he said. That's all that's necessary. And that's what we've been talking about, right? Is not turning our backs. So I leave you with a positive, if tinged with anger, note. Do not turn your backs. Sound the alarm. Share the facts with as many people as you can, using social media, writing op-eds, writing for your synagogue or church newsletters. Advocate continuously, writing and calling Congress, participating in protests and vigils. They matter. Volunteer for organizations like us. The webpage for volunteering is in the chat. Donate your money in any amount. Support our continuous and successful fight against our lawless, dehumanizing government. Thank you, Jutta, for your words of wisdom and reflection today, and for your fabulous program, which works every day to prevent another Holocaust. Thank you all for attending and learning and for sounding the alarm along with me.